Hello, I'm Ben of Board Game Schoolhouse, and this is Elementary, where you can come to learn how to make the most of family board game night. Today, we're talking about Star Wars Legion Lite. Legion Lite is a competitive tabletop miniatures board game for 2 players, modified by me to be used by kids as young as 5. If you're already a big Legion fan and have been looking forward to playing this with the kids in your life, then this video is for you. If you're not a Legion player but you're interested in getting started, I suggest you check out the other channel that I'm a part of, Team Relentless. Team Relentless has videos on Legion strategy, and guides on what to buy, and stuff like that. But for now, let's make sure we're all familiar with the game.
This is where the fun begins.
The premise of the game is this. Each player controls an army of Star Wars miniatures that they will command over the course of 6 rounds. In the full version of the game, there are a somewhat overwhelming number of rules, which is why I've made this light version for kids, or honestly, anyone who's looking for a more casual experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So on each player's turn, they choose one of their units that hasn't gone yet this round, and they take 2 actions with it. Actions are either moving or attacking, although it's important to note that a unit can only attack once per turn. After 6 rounds, or when someone has lost all their units, the game is over. The complete modified rules are linked in the description for your viewing pleasure, but the focus of Elementary isn't to summarize the rulebook. It's about learning how to maximize the experience of board games for kids. So let's get started with that right now.
Here we go again.
Miniature games are known to have a fair amount of prep to them before the gameplay ever actually happens. You can involve kids in this process as much as is appropriate based on their age and experience. For example, one of the most exciting parts of this game for kids is getting to play as some of their favorite Star Wars characters, so they should be, at least to some extent, involved in building their army. Older kids are going to be able to understand the simplified army building rules of Legion Lite, and they can enjoy picking the units that they're going to play with almost no support from you. Younger kids, however, are going to need you to build their armies for them. With my 5-year-old, I let her see all my minis and tell me which ones she'd be most excited to play. Then I build an army for her that's manageable for her to play given her knowledge of the game. Then I build my own army, thinking mainly of theme and how to appropriately disadvantage myself so that the game will be close. Also, a major aspect of most miniatures games is painting the minis. If you want to involve kids in this process, then that's great. And while your minis don't have to be painted to hit the table, they sure do look better if they are.
You look good.
Kira gets it. The last part of setup is placing the terrain on the play area. Again, with younger kids, you're going to want to do all the heavy lifting, but with older kids or more experienced kids, you can let them help with this process and enjoy doing it together.
Share the load, share the load, the load.
When you're building armies and setting up terrain, I highly recommend you think of a little background story that you can then play out on the table. While the strategy aspects of Legion are all fine and good, most people who play the game do so because it's Star Wars. Double down on this with kids by using the game as an opportunity to tell a story as it unfolds in a Star Wars setting. Now, of course, one way of doing this is to recreate some of the famous battles from the movies and TV shows. However, you can get creative and tell your own stories using your own imagination as well. For example, maybe a group of rebels is in search of a new hidden base when they stumble across a bunch of clankers who don't even realize that the Clone Wars are over.
Clankers. I like that.
With really young kids, even doing something like manipulating the movement tools and making legal moves may prove to be a struggle. Remember that the ultimate goal here is to fall into a Star Wars experience with the child. If inaccurate moves happen, it's okay, so long as it's not being done intentionally to gain an advantage. For example, I find kids really like to move the minis of a unit around so they look really cool in the terrain. While technically this is a no-no if the unit isn't moving, if it doesn't have an impact on the game, it's fine. You're also going to want to do a lot of saying out loud what good options are for kids to take on their turn, and holding out range tools so kids know how far up they need to move in order to make an attack. But always let the child ultimately decide what they're doing on their turn, and be sure to honor whatever decisions they make, regardless of if they're actually good ones.
You must do what you feel is right, of course.
So related to that previous point, you should always say aloud while you're doing what you're doing. You want kids eventually to be able to figure out good board game strategies and to think critically on their own. And so you need to make sure that they're exposed to the reasoning behind the good moves. You should do this in every board game, by the way, not just Legion. Oh, and don't turn it into a pop quiz every 2 seconds. This isn't the Battle School in Ender's Game. Now that doesn't mean you can't ask questions and encourage thinking, but at no point should a kid feel like they're being assessed when they're playing a board game with you. Unless, of course, you're trying to give kids anxiety disorders.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Be sure to set expectations of how to behave when you win or you lose ahead of playing, and remind kids during the game a few times of these expectations. It's honestly not a bad idea to rehearse this with roleplay ahead of time. Sportsmanship is a learned trait, and developing it in kids is something that you can and should be doing intentionally. Be sure that you set a good example of what it means to be a good sport. When you win, be gracious and polite. And when you lose, congratulate the winner and do not make excuses for the loss.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous.
If a kid is having a hard time with losing, read the situation carefully before responding. While poor sportsmanship can't be allowed, if a child is really upset, then their brain is literally not prepared to listen to anything you have to say. You might need to say something like, I see that you're very upset and I'd like to talk with you about this more later when we're feeling more calm. And just table the conversation for later when emotions are not running so hot. One of the great things about Legion Lite, if I do say so myself, is that the difficulty can be scaled up as needed. The advice I have for doing this is don't be in a big hurry, especially with younger kids, to do this. Add rules to the game as a way to keep things challenging and interesting, and always ask the child you're playing with before you add in a new rule. Remember, the goal of playing Legion Lite with kids is not to get them to the full version of the game as quickly as possible. It's to have fun playing with Star Wars minis together. One last tip I have for you is to use observational language when playing board games with kids. Observational language is just literally saying aloud what you see someone else doing. For example, you might say something like, oh, I see that you measured very carefully to make sure that when you moved you'd be able to attack my battle droids. Or, oh, I noticed that you counted those dice very carefully. And as a side note, using observational language with kids is a good idea pretty much always, not just when playing board games. And that's how you make the most of playing Legion Lite with kids. If you'd like to watch a sample game played with a real-life human child, there's a link around here somewhere for that. And if you're someone who gets a little nervous explaining board game rules to kids, then I have a video that you can watch together before playing. If you like the video, please prove it, and subscribe if you're into that sort of thing. I'm Ben of Board Game Schoolhouse, and this has been Elementary Star Wars Legion Lite.